The night air was thick with humidity, and the glow of the streetlights seemed dimmer than usual along County Road 47. Evan had taken this road dozens of times on his way home from work, but tonight, everything felt unfamiliar, off, as though he'd slipped into some version of the world that wasn't entirely his own. His car hummed along steadily, headlights cutting through the curtain of mist that had rolled in without warning. Every so often, he glanced at the clock on his dashboard, 12:03 a.m. He told himself not to overthink it. It was just another late-night drive. Still, the silence pressed down heavier than usual. Most of the time, there would be a few cars in the distance, headlights peeking around the bends, maybe a pair of taillights far ahead. But tonight, there was nothing. Evan hadn't passed a single car since leaving the gas station 20 minutes earlier. The road was utterly deserted, stretching endlessly before him like a black ribbon unraveling into the unknown. He tried to comfort himself with music, flipping through the radio stations, but all he found was static, distorted voices, and the occasional burst of garbled sound that made him snap the dial off altogether. He decided he preferred the silence to that. As the minutes stretched, a gnawing sensation settled in his gut. Something was wrong. His headlights illuminated the trees crowding the sides of the road, their branches twisting in strange shapes like skeletal hands reaching out of the dark. Occasionally, his eyes caught fleeting movements in his peripheral vision, like shadows darting between the trunks. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, telling himself it was just deer. Still, he couldn't shake the impression that something was pacing him in the forest, keeping perfect speed with his car. His heart beat faster, and every turn of the road seemed to drag him deeper into nowhere. Then he saw it. Up ahead, in the glow of his headlights, a figure stood at the side of the road. A man, or at least the shape of one. Evan slowed instinctively, squinting through the windshield. The figure was dressed in dark clothing, its face obscured beneath the hood of a sweatshirt. It didn't move as the car approached, didn't lift a thumb like a hitchhiker would. It simply stood there, still as stone, head angled slightly as though watching him. A cold shiver coursed down Evan's spine. He didn't stop. He pressed the gas, heart hammering, and as the car passed, he dared one glance into the rearview mirror. The figure was gone. Not just receding into the distance, gone. The side of the road where it had been was empty, the mist swirling lazily as if nothing had been there at all. Evan's mouth went dry, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He flicked his eyes back and forth between the road and the mirror, every nerve in his body screaming to keep going, not to pull over, not to look too long. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if exhaustion had played tricks on his vision. But then, faintly through the static of his car radio, he heard it, a voice whispering his name. Faded into the static. His first instinct was to shut the radio off again, but he hesitated. His thumb hovered over the dial while the sound wavered, flickering between bursts of noise and something that almost sounded like words. He strained to hear, leaning forward as though closing the distance would make the voice clearer. For a moment, there was only garbled hiss. Then, low and deliberate, came the unmistakable syllables. Evan, his chest tightened. Nobody should know his name out here. He forced himself to laugh, though it came out thin and cracked. Probably some stupid pirate broadcast, he muttered, trying to sound convinced. Or interference. Just interference. But the words tasted like lies in his mouth. The highway was still deserted, and the fog ahead looked even thicker, pooling into shapes that seemed almost solid. He tightened his seatbelt and pressed harder on the accelerator, urging the car forward. Every instinct screamed at him to get home as quickly as possible, to shut his door and pretend none of this had ever happened. Yet the longer he drove, the more the air inside the car felt wrong, charged, like static before a lightning strike. Another voice joined the first, faint but distinct enough to make Evan's skin prickle. It wasn't saying his name this time, but something else, syllables he didn't recognize, whispered in a rhythm too deliberate to be random noise. The voices overlapped, one low and gravelly, the other sharp and hurried, a conversation carried out just below his comprehension. He fumbled with the radio dial again, twisting it violently from station to station. The voices didn't vanish. They grew louder, as if the very act of trying to escape them only gave them more strength. The dashboard lights flickered. Evan slammed his palm against the radio, and the sound cut out all at once. Silence rushed in, heavy and suffocating. He dared to breathe again, only for his relief to crumble when the voice returned, not through the speakers this time, but from the back seat. His entire body froze. The car didn't veer, didn't slow, because some primal part of him knew better than to turn around. His pulse roared in his ears as the voice whispered his name again, softer now, close enough that he could feel the breath against his neck. The steering wheel trembled beneath his grip. When he finally gathered the courage to glance at the rearview mirror, his stomach lurched. For a fraction of a second, he saw it. The hooded figure, sitting calmly in the back seat, its face hidden, its head tilted in the same unnatural angle as before. Then, just as quickly, it was gone, leaving only the empty darkness of the back seat. Evan swerved, the car fishtailing before he wrestled it back under control. He gasped for air, his eyes wild, knuckles bone-white. Whatever this was, it wasn't a trick of exhaustion. Something had followed him onto that road. Evan's knuckles ached from clutching the wheel, but he couldn't loosen his grip. Every muscle in his body screamed for him to stop the car, to pull over, to get out and breathe, but instinct warned him that leaving the vehicle would be worse than anything happening inside it. He kept his foot heavy on the gas, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Yet the farther he drove, the more it seemed like the world was folding in on itself. The highway stretched on in endless loops, mile after mile of identical trees and mist, with no landmarks, no exits, no signs. Hadn't he passed that crooked oak before? When he finally spotted a green highway sign emerging through the fog, relief surged through him like a lifeline. He slowed slightly to read it, heart hammering against his ribs. The reflective letters shimmered in the headlights. Exit 13, Miller Road. He didn't remember there being a Miller Road off this stretch. Still, he told himself it didn't matter. Any road leading off this cursed highway was better than staying trapped on it. He flicked on his blinker, even though there was no one to signal to, and guided the car onto the off-ramp. The ramp twisted sharply, curling into the mist like a serpent. Evan leaned into the turn, trying to shake off the prickling feeling crawling up his neck. For a brief moment, the radio flared back to life, crackling with distorted laughter. His stomach knotted, but he refused to look at the dashboard. Eyes on the pavement. Just keep driving. When the curve straightened, he expected to see a normal side road, houses maybe, or a lonely gas station. Instead, his headlights illuminated only more trees, thicker now, pressing closer, their branches arching over the road to form a tunnel. Something about the trees was wrong. Their trunks leaned inward at odd angles, and their bark looked slick, almost wet, as if they had been sweating in the humid night. Shadows shifted between them, darting across the road too fast to follow. Evan's breath caught when he realized the forest around him was silent. Not even the chirp of crickets or the distant call of an owl. The soundproof hush pressed against his eardrums, amplifying every squeak of his tires on the asphalt. He thought of pulling over to check his phone for directions, but the idea of stopping filled him with cold dread. As he rounded another bend, he saw something up ahead that made his blood run cold. A second green highway sign. It read the same as before. Exit 13, Miller Road. Evan's throat tightened. He checked his rearview mirror, but the curve of the road behind him was swallowed by fog. No way to confirm where he had just come from. He gritted his teeth and pushed on, though he already knew what he'd see. Within minutes, the sign appeared again. Exit 13, Miller Road. A loop. No matter how far he drove, this turnoff kept bringing him back to the same place. And with every pass, he noticed the shadows at the roadside standing a little closer. Evan's hands shook as the car surged forward, tires humming against the endless blacktop. His eyes burned from straining at the fog, but stopping wasn't an option. The third time he passed the Exit 13, Miller Road sign, he nearly screamed in frustration. No, 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 this isn't real. His voice cracked in the silence. His phone lay useless in the passenger seat, its screen still stubbornly showing no service. He thought about throwing it out the window just to hear something shatter. The feeling of being trapped, looping endlessly with no escape, was starting to break him. The air inside the car grew colder. Not gradually, like the creeping chill of night, but sudden, biting, unnatural. His breath fogged in front of his face. The defrost vents blasted warm air, but it didn't matter. A presence filled the cabin, so heavy it was hard to breathe. His skin prickled, as if invisible eyes were crawling over him. He knew he wasn't alone, though he hadn't dared look yet. Every nerve screamed to keep his eyes locked on the road. The silence was thick, oppressive, waiting. Then came the sound, a slow, deliberate scrape, like fabric sliding against leather. From the back seat, Evan's heart pounded so hard it made his vision blur. He whispered to himself, "Don't look, don't look, don't." But against all instinct, his eyes darted up to the rearview mirror. His stomach dropped. The hooded figure was there, seated directly behind him, motionless. The shadow of its hood revealed no face, only a depthless void that seemed to swallow the dim light. Its head tilted the same unnatural angle, as if studying him. Evan's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to slam the brakes, to fling the door open and run into the fog, but his body wouldn't obey. Then it moved. Slowly, impossibly slow, the figure leaned forward. The hood shifted forward into the glow of the dashboard, and though Evan strained to glimpse a face, there was nothing there, just more blackness, like staring into the mouth of a cave. The air grew so cold that frost laced the edges of the windshield. A whisper drifted forward, but this time it wasn't his name. It was a sentence, spoken in a voice that carried both gravel and static. "You shouldn't have taken the road." That broke the paralysis. Evan screamed, swerving violently, his car skidding across the slick asphalt. The tires screeched, the steering wheel ripped against his grip, and for a terrifying second, he thought the car would flip. He corrected the skid, barely avoiding the ditch, chest heaving. With one wild glance in the mirror, he saw the back seat was empty again. But the words still hung in the frozen air, echoing in his skull. He knew then that this wasn't just a haunting. He had stumbled into something bigger, something that didn't want him to leave. Evan's hands trembled on the wheel, his pulse a frantic drumbeat in his ears. The figure's words lingered, every syllable carved into his mind. "You shouldn't have taken the road." He forced himself to breathe, whispering, "Stay calm. Just keep driving." The fog thickened so much now it was like plowing through milk. He slowed, terrified he'd run into something hidden in the mist. For a moment, all he heard was the low rumble of his tires. Then the radio snapped back to life, not with whispers this time, but with a deafening burst of shrieks, like dozens of voices screaming at once. Evan twisted the knob frantically, but no matter how he spun it, the noise didn't stop. His vision blurred, his temples throbbing under the sheer volume. Then, as abruptly as it started, the screams cut out, leaving only a single, steady voice. It wasn't whispering anymore. It was chanting. The words weren't English. They weren't anything he recognized. But they hit him like a vibration in his bones, as though the car itself was resonating with the sound. His breath caught when he realized the headlights ahead weren't piercing blank fog anymore. Something was taking shape in the road. At first, he thought it was a tree, a twisted column of black stretching up into the mist. But as the car drew closer, his stomach knotted. It wasn't a tree. It was a figure, taller than the hooded one, impossibly thin, with limbs that bent at the wrong angles. Its surface rippled as if its body was made of smoke and tar. The thing stood dead center in the road, unmoving, waiting. Evan slammed his foot on the brakes, tires screeching, heart clawing at his ribs. The car fishtailed and stopped just yards away from the thing. The figure tilted its head in a jerking, unnatural motion, exactly the same way the hooded figure had. Evan froze, gripping the wheel so hard he thought his bones might snap. The chanting from the radio grew louder, almost excited, and the lights on his dashboard flickered wildly. The tall shadow stretched its limbs outward, arms impossibly long, fingers tapering into points. They brushed the asphalt, leaving black smears that hissed like acid. Then, slowly, deliberately, the thing leaned forward, pressing its faceless head closer to the windshield as though trying to peer inside. Evan panicked. He slammed the car into reverse, tires squealing as the vehicle lurched backward. For a heartbeat, the shadow didn't move. But then its limbs stretched, dragging across the pavement as it began to follow. Its long, liquid steps disturbingly smooth, as though gravity meant nothing to it. Evan screamed, flooring the gas, the car tearing backward through the fog. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew one thing. If that thing caught him, it wouldn't just kill him. It would keep him here. Forever. Evan's car roared backward down the empty road, tires shrieking against wet asphalt. His heart slammed against his ribs as he watched the thing move. No, flow toward him. Its elongated limbs dragged across the pavement without sound, its body stretching unnaturally with each step, as if the fog itself was helping it advance. His headlights jittered over its form, and for a split second, he swore its body was bending closer, filling the beam with shifting black. He spun the wheel hard, trying to reverse around the bend. The back tires clipped the ditch, jolting him forward into the steering wheel. Pain burst across his chest as the seatbelt caught him. The car fishtailed wildly, nearly tipping. Evan cursed, slamming the shifter into drive and flooring the gas. The engine howled as the car shot forward, headlights tearing open the fog. Behind him, in the mirror, he caught the impossible sight. The thing hadn't been left behind. It was keeping pace, not running, just gliding forward, its limbs dragging against the asphalt like ropes pulled by some unseen force. And it was closing the distance. The chanting returned over the radio, this time so loud that the dashboard rattled. Evan slapped the knob, but the radio wouldn't shut off. The words spilled through the car, strange syllables pounding in rhythm with his heartbeat. His mind flashed to the hooded figure's warning. You shouldn't have taken the road. Was this thing part of what he wasn't supposed to see? Panic drove him faster. The speedometer climbed past 70, then 80. The trees on either side blurred together into streaks of shadow. Yet the thing was still there, right in the middle of the road, somehow keeping up. Evan's vision blurred with tears, his lungs burning. Every time he dared to look in the mirror, the figure seemed closer, its head cocked at that same unnatural angle. Once, for a horrifying instant, he thought he saw it pressed against the rear window, its faceless void staring straight inside. He swerved hard, nearly losing control, and when he glanced back, it was farther away again, standing in the center of the road as though it had never moved. The fog thickened so heavily that he couldn't even see the hood of his car. He drove blind, gripping the wheel until his hands ached. Then, through the veil of mist, lights appeared ahead. Red lights. Taillights. Relief flooded him. Finally, another car. He pressed harder on the accelerator, desperate to catch up. The lights grew closer, clearer, until he could make out the shape of a sedan, moving at a steady pace. Evan leaned forward, honking his horn, shouting, "Hey, hey, help me." But as he pulled closer, his stomach dropped. The car ahead was his. Same make, same model, same cracked rear bumper sticker. And through the rear window, he saw himself, hands locked on the wheel, eyes wide in terror, driving the road just a few yards ahead. Evan's mind reeled as the duplicate car held steady ahead of him. His own taillights glowed red in the fog, and the cracked bumper sticker he had stopped noticing years ago stared back like a taunt. He squinted through the haze, trying to deny what his eyes showed him. But there was no mistake. It was him. His car. His body. The way the figure behind the wheel hunched forward was unmistakable. He knew that posture, that desperation. Evan honked again, the sound thin and pathetic against the wall of mist. The other driver didn't react. He might as well have been honking at a reflection. The radio screeched, drowning out his own ragged breaths. Beneath the static, Evan thought he heard laughter, low and cruel. Then a new voice, different from the chanting, slithered through the speakers. "You're catching up." His chest tightened. Catching up to what? To himself? The double ahead seemed to blur at the edges, its taillights leaving streaks of red across the fog like smeared paint. Evan pressed harder on the gas. The speedometer needle edged toward 90. His car shuddered with the strain, but the distance closed. The closer he got, the clearer the figure in the driver's seat became. His breath caught when he finally saw the driver's face. It was him, but not exactly. The features were right. The jaw, the messy hair, the sweat-slick forehead. But the eyes were wrong. They glowed faintly, pale and unnatural, like the reflection of an animal in a camera flash. And the expression? Evan had never seen himself wear that expression before. A wide, unbroken grin stretched across his double's face, so forced it looked painful, lips drawn back to show clenched teeth. The duplicate's hands gripped the wheel tight, veins bulging, as though it was barely holding something in check. Evan's stomach lurched. Instinct screamed at him to slam the brakes, to let the other car vanish into the fog. But before he could, his double's brake lights flared. The duplicate car slowed suddenly, forcing Evan to swerve violently to avoid rear-ending himself. His tires shrieked, and the car skidded sideways before straightening out. His pulse roared in his ears. When he looked up, his double's car was gone. Nothing but fog and road stretched ahead. He blinked, swearing under his breath. Had he imagined it? A flicker in his peripheral vision snapped his head around. His double wasn't ahead anymore. It was beside him. The identical car glided silently just outside his window, matching his speed perfectly. Evan turned his head and locked eyes with himself. Those glowing eyes. That impossible grin. The double tilted its head, exactly like the hooded figure had. Then, in perfect sync, its lips moved. Evan couldn't hear the words over the roar of his engine and the screaming in his head, but he didn't need to. He read his own mouth forming them, slow and deliberate. "You won't leave." Evan's pulse thundered as the twin car hovered beside him. His double's glowing eyes and unnatural grin cut through the fog like knives. Every glance a violation of sanity. He wanted to look away, but the doppelganger was hypnotic, like staring into a nightmare version of himself that refused to blink. Suddenly, the duplicate swerved closer. The side mirror nearly scraped his door. Evan jerked his wheel to the right, tires screeching. "No, no, no," he gasped. The double swerved again, keeping perfect pace, closing the gap like a predator herding prey. The radio roared to life with the same guttural chanting, vibrating through the car's frame. This time, however, the voice of his double came through the speakers, distorted but unmistakable. "You can't outrun yourself." Evan's breath caught in his throat. His duplicate's car drifted closer still, the headlights flickering as if pulled by the same static choking the air. Evan tried to push the accelerator, but the car shuddered violently, dashboard lights dimming as if the road itself rejected his escape. For the first time, he realized he wasn't in control anymore. The impact came sudden and brutal. The duplicate car slammed into his side with a screech of grinding metal. Evan's vehicle lurched violently, nearly flipping. He fought the wheel, his teeth rattling, as sparks burst along the driver's side where the cars scraped together. He screamed, shoving his foot against the accelerator, trying to break free. But the double matched his every move, pressing him closer toward the tree line where twisted branches waited like claws. His reflection's glowing eyes burned through the window, locked on him with inhuman intensity. With a surge of desperation, Evan twisted the wheel and rammed back. His car slammed into the duplicates, a crunch of metal shivering through his bones. For a heartbeat, the fog lit with sparks as the two cars scraped against each other, locked in a death match of steel. Evan's hands blistered against the steering wheel, sweat pouring into his eyes. Then, with one final shove, the duplicate car jerked sideways and spun off the road, vanishing into the fog with a horrible screech. Silence dropped, sudden and absolute. As though the impact had swallowed the world whole, Evan's chest heaved as he slowed, hands trembling, heart threatening to explode from his ribs. He glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting twisted wreckage, a fire, something. But the road behind him was empty. No skid marks, no shattered glass, not even a sound of fading metal. It was as if the other car had never been there. He exhaled shakily, trying to believe it was over. Then the radio clicked on once more. Calm now. The static smoothed into a single voice. His voice. "You only crashed one of us," it said softly. "There are more." Evan drove blindly, his breaths ragged and shallow, the words from the radio gnawing at his mind. There are more. He kept his eyes locked on the road, afraid of what he might see in the mirrors. The fog thickened, curling in unnatural swirls that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. Every turn felt identical, every mile the same as the last, as though the highway had folded him into a loop of despair. Then, faintly ahead, two red taillights appeared again. His stomach sank that it wasn't one car this time. As his headlights cut through the haze, more pairs of glowing taillights appeared, staggered along the road. 1, then 3, then 5, until the fog shimmered with rows of them stretching into the distance. Evan's throat tightened. Each one looked identical to his own car. Identical dents, identical stickers, identical shapes hunched behind the wheels. His foot eased off the accelerator as dread rooted him to the seat. The rows began to move. One by one, the cars flickered to life, pulling forward in perfect unison, engines growling in the mist. Point three at the first pulled alongside him, then another. Evan glanced left, and his blood froze. Through the windows of the duplicate cars, his doubles stared back, each version slightly more wrong than the last. One had eyes glowing white-hot, like bulbs ready to burst. Another's mouth was stretched unnaturally wide, lips torn at the corners. One sat unervingly still, its body rigid, hands fused to the steering wheel as if grown there. Yet each wore the same grin. Each tilted its head at the same impossible angle. Point four. Panic surged. Evan slammed the gas, but the road seemed endless, and the cars matched his speed effortlessly. The sound was deafening, an army of engines snarling in unison, vibrations rattling his bones. He tried to swerve between them, but they shifted fluidly, cutting him off, hurting him like wolves circling prey. Their headlights flared brighter, bleaching the fog until he could barely see. Sweat dripped into his eyes as his vision blurred, hands slipping on the wheel. He was trapped in a corridor of himself, each reflection more monstrous, each one grinning wider than the last. Point five. Then, without warning, the cars all braked at once. The sudden red glow was blinding, a wall of brake lights bleeding through the fog. Evan slammed his foot down, tires screaming as the car fishtailed. He skidded to a stop, chest heaving, hands shaking violently. When the mist cleared, the cars were gone. Nothing but empty road stretched ahead and behind. His body trembled with relief until he noticed movement on the roadside. The hooded figure was there again, standing at the tree line, waiting. This time, it lifted its hand, crooked and pale, and pointed directly at him. Evan's pulse raced as the hooded figure stood by the tree line, one pale hand raised, pointing straight at him. The rows of duplicate cars were gone, swallowed by the fog as though they had never existed. But he knew better. They hadn't disappeared. They were waiting, watching. The air inside the car turned heavy again, pressing against his lungs. He tried to tell himself to keep driving, to floor the gas and ignore the figure. But this time he couldn't. Every instinct screamed that running would only bring him back to the same road, the same loop, over and over. The figure was the only way forward. Point two. With trembling hands, he pulled the car to the shoulder and killed the engine. The silence that followed was almost unbearable, so thick it hummed in his ears. The hooded figure didn't move as he opened the door. The cold air hit him immediately, carrying a strange metallic tang that made his throat tighten. Gravel crunched under his shoes as he stepped out, his knees nearly buckling. "What do you want from me?" His voice was raw, breaking. The figure didn't answer. It only lowered its hand and tilted its head in that same bone-jarring angle. The gesture that now haunted him. Point three. Evan staggered closer, heart hammering against his ribs. As he reached the edge of the road, the hooded figure finally moved. Its hand rose slowly, pulling back the hood. For a moment, the fog seemed to recoil, pulling away to reveal its face. Evan's breath caught in his throat. He was staring at himself. Not the twisted doubles, not the glowing-eyed reflections, but a perfect copy, down to the scar on his chin from childhood. This version of him didn't grin. It looked tired, hollow, older somehow. Its eyes met his, and when it spoke, the voice was his own, flat and final. "I warned you." Evan stumbled back, shaking his head violently. No, that wasn't me. Those things, they aren't me." The hooded version of himself took a step forward, and with it, the forest seemed to shift. Behind the trees, shadows rippled, dozens of faces pressing against the mist. Each was one of his doubles, their glowing eyes watching, their grins widening in perfect unison. The hooded version raised its hand again, pointing back toward the car. "The road doesn't let go," it said. "It only collects." Evan's chest tightened. He looked over his shoulder and saw movement inside his own car. Someone, no, himself, sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, waiting. Point five. Terror rooted him to the spot. He turned back, but the hooded version was gone, swallowed by the fog. The forest was still, silent, as though nothing had ever been there. But when he spun back toward the car, his heart plummeted. The driver's door was closed. The headlights flicked on, blinding him. Through the glare, he saw his own silhouette seated at the wheel, staring out at him. The engine rumbled to life, and in the instant before it surged forward, he realized the truth. He was no longer the driver. He was just another reflection on the roadside, watching someone else take his place.